Here is something nobody tells you about being surrounded by people who love you. It can be the most dangerous place in the world. Not because love itself is dangerous, but because the appearance of love, the architecture of it, the language and the gestures, and the social infrastructure of a group of people who have agreed to call themselves your people, can be constructed around you so completely and so convincingly that by the time you understand it is not love at all, you have been inside it for so long that the walls look like home. What I am about to tell you is not the story of one person who deceived one woman. It is the story of 11 people who constructed a reality around one woman in which she was always the variable and never the constant, always the one who reacted and never the one who was acted upon, always the one who needed to adjust and grow and develop thicker skin and be less sensitive and stop taking things so personally. 11 people who looked at her face for 4 years and saw not a person but a problem to be managed. And one woman who eventually looked back at those 11 people and understood, with a clarity so complete it felt like surgery, that the most powerful thing she could do was simply stop looking. Welcome to Venom Thread. This one is going to make you think about every room you have ever felt too much in. Her name was Celeste. She was 29 years old when she joined the company and the friend group that came with it, the particular social ecosystem that forms in certain kinds of workplaces where the boundaries between professional and personal dissolve over time into something that functions like a surrogate family. You know the kind. The after-work drinks that become a standing Thursday tradition. The group chat that runs 24 hours and contains more of your daily emotional life than any single one-on-one relationship. The shorthand and the inside references and the particular comfort of a group of people who have seen you at your worst on a Tuesday and still saved you a seat on a Thursday. Celeste had not had this before. She had grown up moving frequently, had built and rebuilt friendships with the exhausting regularity of someone who had learned not to become too attached to the specific people in a place because the place had a habit of changing. When this group absorbed her, it felt like finding ground after years of swimming. It felt like arrival. She did not know yet that she had not arrived somewhere safe. She had arrived somewhere that had already decided what it needed her to be. The first time someone told Celeste she was too sensitive, she was 3 months into the job. A colleague named Ryan had made a comment during a team lunch that landed on her in a way she could not immediately name, but that she knew had landed wrong. She had said something about it quietly to the woman sitting next to her, a woman named Priscilla who was considered by the group to be the emotional center of their social circle. And Priscilla had looked at her with an expression of gentle concern and said, "You know, Ryan does not mean anything by it. He is like that with everyone. You might just be reading it a little too personally." And Celeste had accepted this. She had accepted it the way you accept a correction from someone whose judgment you trust and whose warmth toward you seems genuine, which Priscilla's did. She adjusted her reading of the situation. She filed Ryan under harmless and moved on. What she did not know was that the filing had been done for her. That Priscilla's gentle correction had not come from a neutral place. That the version of Ryan she had just been given was the version the group preferred her to have. She was 3 months in, and the architecture was already being built around her, and she was holding the materials and handing them up without knowing she was constructing her own enclosure. By the end of her first year, Celeste had been told she was too sensitive 11 times by 7 different people in the group. She kept a record of this, though not intentionally at first. She was a person who processed things by writing them down, and she had a journal habit she had maintained since her early 20s, and the entries from that year have a quality that she described to me later as the quality of a person trying very hard to understand what is wrong with herself. Because that is how she experienced it. Not as 11 separate incidents involving 7 separate people, but as 11 confirmations of a single truth about herself that the people around her were helping her to see. She was too sensitive. She took things too personally. She had a tendency to misread neutral situations as charged ones. This was not a character assassination. It was delivered every single time with the specific warmth of people who cared about her and wanted her to be okay. The caring tone was the mechanism. The caring tone is always the mechanism. Because the same information delivered with coldness would have activated her defenses, and she would have been able to argue with it. Delivered with warmth, it bypassed the defenses entirely and went directly into the place where she stored things she believed about herself. What none of the 11 people had said to Celeste, what none of them had acknowledged in any of those conversations, was that the situations she was misreading as charged were charged. Ryan's comments were not harmless. The dynamic in the group was not neutral. There was a hierarchy operating beneath the surface of the Thursday drinks and the group chat and the saved seats, and the hierarchy had been established well before Celeste arrived, and it had a logic to it that required certain people to be visible and central and unquestioned, and required certain other people to be peripheral and accommodating and reliably self-doubting. Celeste had been assigned the second category on arrival. Not consciously, perhaps. Not through a meeting where 11 people looked at her photograph and decided she was going to be the group's emotional release valve, but through the accumulated small decisions of a social group that had found in Celeste someone whose responsiveness to caring correction made her exceptionally easy to manage. She felt things visibly. She cared about relationships genuinely. She wanted to be fair to people even when people had not been fair to her. These qualities had made her a good friend her entire life. In this particular group, they made her the perfect target. The escalation happened in year 2, and it happened through the group chat. The group chat was a living document of the social life they all shared, photographs and plans, and the rapid-fire commentary on daily events that constitutes the connective tissue of a close friend group in the current era. What Celeste noticed in year 2 was that certain things she said in the chat were received differently from the same things said by other members. A mild observation about a situation at work would generate, from the group, a cluster of responses that gently redirected the observation back toward her, not as a reflection on the situation, but as a reflection on how she was feeling, which was then framed as something to examine. The same observation from Ryan or from a woman named Dominique would generate agreement and expansion. The pattern was not dramatic. It was not something she could point to in a single exchange and say, "Here, this is the proof." It was a weather pattern, a consistent microclimate within the larger environment of the group in which Celeste's perceptions were treated as symptoms and everyone else's perceptions were treated as facts. She noticed it in the specific way that you notice something your conscious mind has not yet been given permission to name, as a low-grade persistent unease that she attributed, because she had been trained to attribute it, to her own sensitivity. She raised it once, directly and vulnerably, in the way that Celeste had always addressed things that bothered her. She went to Priscilla, who was the person she trusted most in the group, and she said that she had been feeling like her perspective was often redirected back to her as a personal issue rather than engaged with on its own terms, and she wanted to know if Priscilla had noticed that pattern or if she was reading it wrong. Priscilla was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the full warmth and genuine seeming concern that Celeste had come to associate with her most trusted advisor, "I think what you might be feeling is some anxiety about belonging, which makes complete sense given your history of moving around a lot. The group loves you. I think sometimes you might interpret neutral responses as rejection because of that old pattern. Have you thought about talking to someone professionally about this?" Celeste left that conversation having been given 3 things that felt like gifts: understanding of her history, reassurance of her belonging, and a caring suggestion that she seek professional support. She did not understand until much later that she had also been given a 4th thing: a diagnosis, a framework that preemptively explained any future concerns she raised as products of old anxiety rather than responses to current reality. Priscilla had just built a wall around every complaint Celeste might ever make and installed a door in it that led not outward toward accountability, but inward towards self-examination. And she had done it with such complete fluency that Celeste had said thank you. The therapist she eventually saw, not because Priscilla suggested it, but because she found one independently 8 months later when the unease had grown from low-grade to genuinely disruptive, was the first person in 2 years who listened to Celeste describe her experience without redirecting it back toward her. She described the group chat. She described the 11 conversations. She described Priscilla's response when she raised her concerns. She described the way the group functioned, the hierarchy she had observed, the specific quality of the reception her observations received versus the reception other people's observations received. And the therapist listened to all of it, and then said something that Celeste would later describe as the moment the light changed. She said, "What you are describing is not an individual pattern. What you are describing is a group dynamic in which a consistent behavior is being directed at you by multiple people simultaneously. That is not your sensitivity. That is a coordinated social environment producing a specific effect in you. The question is not what is wrong with you. The question is what function it serves for the group to keep you believing something is wrong with you. Celeste sat with that question for the rest of the session and for most of the week that followed. And the answer, when it arrived, was not complicated. It was simple and cold and complete. The function it served was this. A person who is busy managing her own sensitivity never has the bandwidth to ask what everyone else is doing. She began to watch differently after that. Not with paranoia, with precision. She started noticing not just what was said to her, but what was said around her, and whether the same corrections were applied to other members of the group when they expressed reactions similar to her own. They were not. She started noticing who in the group had standing to raise concerns and who did not, and whether that distribution corresponded to anything visible like seniority or expertise or any other quality that might reasonably explain it. It did not correspond to any of those things. It corresponded with perfect consistency to a single variable, proximity to Priscilla. The people closest to Priscilla had standing. The people on the periphery of Priscilla's regard did not. And Celeste, who had spent 2 years believing she was at the warm center of a close and genuine friend group, was on the periphery, had always been on the periphery. The warmth she had experienced had not been the warmth of genuine inclusion. It had been the warmth of managed proximity, close enough to feel contained, never close enough to have actual standing. She said nothing to anyone in the group about what she was now understanding. Not because she was afraid of the confrontation. She was, in fact, less afraid of confrontation than she had been at any point in the previous 2 years, because she now understood that her fear of confrontation had been cultivated deliberately. A person who is afraid to raise concerns is a person who can be relied upon to absorb mistreatment quietly. She had been made afraid of confrontation specifically so that she would absorb quietly. Understanding this made the fear lose its grip. She said nothing because she was busy. She had things to build before she was ready to leave, and she understood instinctively that leaving before the building was complete would give the group the opportunity to frame her departure as further evidence of her sensitivity. She was not going to give them that. She was going to leave in a way that was so complete and so structurally final that there was no framework available to explain it as a reaction. She was going to make the leaving look not like an exit, but like an evaporation. Like she had simply stopped being present in the space, and the space had continued without her, and the absence of her had not produced the drama they might have expected because she had removed herself too carefully for drama to attach to. Over the following 3 months, Celeste did 4 things. She deepened her professional relationships with people outside the group, colleagues in other departments, contacts she had been meaning to develop but had not because the group had occupied the entire social bandwidth of her working life. She began to rebuild the friendships she had allowed to recede over 2 years of group absorption. People from before, people who had known her before Priscilla and Ryan and Dominique and the Thursday drinks, people who knew her as the unmanaged version of herself. She reduced her activity in the group chat progressively, by small degrees, in a way that looked like natural busyness rather than deliberate withdrawal. And she stopped attending Thursday drinks, using work obligations as cover the first 2 times, and then not offering explanations at all, because she had learned from watching Priscilla operate that the most powerful social move available to any person in a group is the move that requires no explanation. The people who require no explanation have the standing. She was going to have the standing now, even if she had to build it from scratch on her own outside the group that had convinced her for 2 years that she had none. The final withdrawal happened over the course of a single week in which she removed herself from the group chat, declined 3 separate invitations without explanation, and sent Priscilla a message that said only, "I think I am going to step back from the group for a while. I hope everyone is well." She did not offer reasons. She did not invite dialogue. She did not leave a door open for the kind of caring, concerned response from Priscilla that would have arrived within minutes, and that she now recognized as the instrument by which Priscilla managed the temperature of the social environment. She sent the message and she put down the phone, and she did not check it for 4 hours. When she did check it, there were 17 messages in response from various members of the group expressing confusion and concern and asking if she was okay. The concern was fluent and immediate and genuine seeming, and 2 years earlier, it would have worked. It would have pulled her back in immediately because it looked like love, and sounded like love, and came from the mouths of people she had believed loved her. But she had spent 3 months watching the machinery behind the love and she knew what she was looking at. She did not respond to any of the 17 messages. Not because she was performing coldness, but because she had finally understood that the silence was not abandonment. The silence was the most honest thing she had offered anyone in that group in 2 years. I asked Celeste, a considerable time after all of this had settled, what she wanted people to understand about collective gaslighting that the word gaslighting alone did not communicate. She thought about it for a long time. And then she said, when people hear gaslighting, they picture one person doing it to another person. One villain, one victim, one relationship. And that is terrifying enough. But what happened to me was different. What happened to me was 11 people doing it simultaneously without a meeting, without a plan, without any of them necessarily understanding that they were doing it at all. They were just maintaining a social system that worked for them. And I was the component in the system that the system needed to remain uncertain in order to function. When I became certain, the system stopped working, and I stopped being useful to it, and I left. She paused. She said, the isolation that everyone in that group would have described as a loss, as me pulling away, as my sensitivity finally reaching its limit. That isolation was the most powerful thing I ever built. I did not lose a community. I stopped feeding a machine. And the moment I stopped, the machine had nothing left to run on that belonged to me. She paused one more time. And then she said, they called me too sensitive for 4 years. It turns out what I was too sensitive for was them. And that is not a flaw. That is a compass. Thank you for being here on Venom Thread tonight. If this story found you in a room where everyone agrees you are the problem, stay with that feeling and ask who benefits from you believing it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. New darkness drops next week. We are not done.